There we go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back, everyone. We'll just give another minute to the latecomers. Faces are becoming familiar now. Oh, okay. So in another moment, I'm going to introduce Richard Groves. Most of you saw his video by now. It's really fabulous. And thank you for all your really open, heartfelt comments in the discussion section of the platform. Really appreciate that, the interaction. So again, we're going to use the electronic raised hands. If you recall, it's the reaction button at the bottom of your screen as when Richard opens the discussion. And I'm good. Please anticipate an email from me as we go to the closing event after today, the closing class. It's going to include a ritual, and I'd like you to bring some things with you to that meeting to prepare for the ritual. So be sure if you get something from Pacifica in your email that you check it out. It's a few weeks from now. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Richard Groves. With his late wife, Mary, Richard co-founded the Sacred Art of Living Institute and an online healthcare education resource called Soul and Science for Caregivers. He told me that he's living on the road a lot, going today from Mexico to Toronto, teaching all kinds of medical practitioners and spiritual practitioners. He's a hospice chaplain and professor of world religions. He's also director of Healing the Healers International training series and the Anamkara Apprenticeship Project that trains care providers in Celtic spirituality. He's author of the American Book of Living and Dying, which is available on Amazon, and The Alchemy of Grief will be coming out, forthcoming. So you can look for that. Somebody had asked me about that, and it will be forthcoming. So Richard, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Thanks for including me in your wonderful lineup of presenters in the last months. What a great project to be involved with. And I enjoyed putting together a presentation that I guess most of you probably had a chance to see, and I had a chance to review the different comments and feedback that many of you made. Many of you were making just very kind comments about where the information was helpful. And there weren't a lot of specific questions that I could see that you wanted me to address. So this is really a time to either ask a question or maybe to continue the conversation about one aspect of what I presented or another. I know somebody did ask a question about the exercise I proposed at the end called a vidui, which is like a living spiritual will. And that's very timely because right now we're in the 10 days, the high holy days of the traditional Hebrew New Year. on the calendar. And so this is the time of the year when in that tradition, people would annually write and rewrite, revisit their vidui. And I guess I would just start by saying that you don't have to be Jewish or biblically based to use that exercise. I hope that what maybe some of you might consider appealing is the idea, along with all of your advanced directives and the other things that we do as we get older, is to put something together that maybe is less mechanical and less physiological. And the vidui is meant to be an emotional and spiritual life review in a way, kind of an inventory. And I always find it, I've been doing it now for about 15 years. I make an annual sort of date with myself at the end of the new year to review my vidui and to rewrite it. And there's somebody in my family who knows where it's at for safekeeping. And my instructions are very clear that if I'm in a situation where I'm actively dying and not in an accident, and someone can be at my bedside, I would love to have my vidui read to me as a kind of final spiritual intention. And then my other clear wish is that this would be read at my memorial service, because it really does address the final gifts that I'd like to leave for my children and grandchildren. And there's things there that are very tender and heartfelt. It's not all just a feel-good document. It's also a place to mention regrets, to ask for forgiveness, and to extend blessings to. I have 7 great-grandchildren. So if I died tomorrow, some of them they would never know me, except in that vidui, and that I would be mentioning them by name there and leaving them really some blessings and intention. So I'll just kind of start there. That was just one of the practices that I left you all with there at the end of the presentation. Maybe see if anybody has a question about that, or maybe somebody has an experience with it. I'm just kind of curious, with a show of hands, has anybody ever done a vidui before? Is this like the first time you've ever heard it? Put your hands up. Marjorie. Okay, very good.
Can you see Barbara, Richard, raising her hand?
I do. So very good. So would somebody who's got their hand up like to say something about your experience with the vidui?
I only wish I had some. I was very interested in it. I had never heard about this. And I appreciate you sharing what you just shared about how you use it. Oh gosh, Richard, I wish I had some prompts. I wish I had some samples. Are there viduis that are available to people that we could find inspiration, use for inspiration?
Thank you. Well, yeah, it's, it comes out of mainstream Judaism, but even to be honest, I teach a class with Los Angeles Jewish Theological Seminary, and I've learned more about it interfacing with them. And they've told me that even the practice, as time has gone on, has expanded. Somebody had put in the chat there that it's sometimes called an ethical will. That would be another good name for it. But I think it's even that can sound a little dry. It has the potential, as it was taught to me, to really put our heart on paper as not a last will and testament, what I'm going to do with my material things. But Rabbi Nadia Gross in Boulder, Colorado, who teaches our Anam Cara students about vidui, is the one who explained the potential for the person writing it. It holds us accountable in a way to not sort of polish our life story. We often at the end of a memorial service here talk about what a wonderful person so-and-so was, and that's great to hear. But it also is an honest document. It's a chance to, in some ways, as you carry me in your heart, you're aware also of my humanity and even my brokenness. Deb, I see you have your hand up there. Are you familiar with it?
Not by that name, but I had, and I'm sorry, my voice, I've just come down with COVID, so I'm not 100% today. I was familiar with what I did when I worked for a fire department. We had a black envelope, and the black envelope contained many of the things that you're talking about. It was about who you wanted to be able to have at your bedside if you were dying. And the reason for that was just being in a profession where there was risk, that you needed to have these things sorted out. There was one chaplain that I really didn't like, and it was like, don't have him, but here's who I would like. And so I put those things in, the things like for a memorial service, like what was special and meaningful to me, ways to notify my spouse if something had happened to me. She doesn't deal with death very well. And so by giving names and phone numbers of people who should be called to be with her when she got the news, it caused me to think through and confront my own mortality. With also a way to be thinking of those who are left behind and what I would want them to know and what I'd want them to experience. And then, places for things like, where's my life insurance, where's the will, all that stuff. But I like the what you described as like the more of the spiritual things and the messages for people. That was not part of our black envelope. And so anyway, so I've kind of flirted with it, but not to the complete and more spiritual twist that you've got on it.
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate that. And it's definitely evolving in the Jewish renewal movement. They've really picked this up as an interfaith, interspiritual tool with mixed marriages sometimes. This is something that a couple can share. And the Rabbi Nadia Gross, again, who I reference here, said one common word that might describe it to the average person is confession. And not in the sense of just listing all my picadillos and faults, but sort of an opening of my heart as I do a life review. Marjorie, I see you have your hand up there.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your presentation, Richard. It's always lovely. As a hospice chaplain, one of the times that I used this was really poignant, and it was with a Catholic woman who was in her 80s, and she asked me that she would talk to me and that I would interpret and write this down for her, even though English was her second language. And it was really beautiful because she was able to really share her Catholic faith with the family, her visions, her dreams about Mother Mary, what each of her grandchildren meant to her. And so I wrote that, we polished it, and then she had some of her family, before she died and before she went into transition, she asked me to read it for all of them present. And there wasn't a dry eye in that room. It was beautiful. So it does transition into other faiths, and it is very meaningful. Thank you.
Yes, no, very good. So Ray Ann, you're saying you didn't like the pronunciation of the Dewey that we're using? Do you want to offer a correction on that?
Yeah, hi. It's a Hebrew word, obviously, and the pronunciation is vidui, not vidui.
Yeah.
It's vidui.
Right.
Just
Yeah, and I think Rabbi Nadia mentioned that in her teaching to our class, which is mostly 800 non-Jews. Says, I think you're probably going to, like so many accommodated words, maybe pronounce it as vidui, as others are calling it. But I appreciate the original source of it and the Hebrew of it for sure.
yeah, I prefer the original pronunciation, just as
Sure.
what I'm used to hearing. There's a beautiful piece by Bloch for violin and piano that I've played, that one of the movements is called vidui. There's also nigun and simchat Torah. So it's three, I forget the name of it, 3 pictures of Jewish life or something like that. So I think it's wonderful, this will, the ethical will. I think it's great, and I'm going to try to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that comment, Rayanne. I think one of the other pieces here that you might want to add to your list with this, if you're going to really consider, or if you're in a kind of a helping profession where you might be interfacing with people regularly who might benefit from this, would be Dr. Ira Byock's book, The Four Things That Matter Most. And he teaches a class also for our Anamkara students. It's a brilliant book. It was written quite a number of years ago. And he says, so often, especially with family members, people just don't even know what do I say? There's this awkwardness about not having been around death and dying. And he really just tells beautiful stories and says, there's only four things in the end, four things. I love you. Thank you. Please forgive me. I forgive you. That's so simple. You could add to that others. I've suggested, I will carry you in my heart. I will always remember you. That could be another one you could add to it. You could add to it goodbye. The willingness to give, to say a word of departure at this as they're crossing the threshold. So that's just another sort of aspect of this work. And to be honest, obviously our work at Sacred Art of Living has been so much around training hospice chaplains and people at the end of life. But if you roll this back, we shouldn't have to wait till the end of life for this. In other cultures, we're doing this work earlier in life, and certainly at midlife, at least, Carl Jung would suggest that we ought to be starting to do our mortality work, and that, in fact, something is lost if we don't do that. So this would be one little practice. And like I say, I just always also I'm a Catholic priest, not a rabbi. So I appreciated Rabbi Nadia sharing this with us and sharing it now. It's out in the universe with very interfaith groups and people, regardless of Buddhist background, whatever, Christian, find some way to accommodate it. So,
Richard, I'd like to also mention the 5 wishes, which you can download online from the San Francisco Zen Center. It's a similar practice. It's not so much about your practical wishes around death or legal issues or financial issues. It's really about your spiritual and ethical wishes around dying and death. And it's very non-ecumenical. It's not just Zen. It's very kind of spiritually open, and you can use it in your own way. 5 wishes.
Yeah, very good. Interspiritual. I think a lot of Frank Kostasevsky's work, he's also one of our faculty members in Anamkara. We find, that there's underneath the individual differences, which we respect in our traditions, there's often kind of a common ground. And this is certainly one of them. Humanity's need to articulate what's going on inside of ourselves. It's amazing. In some ways, I find working with people who are doing this for the very first time, it's often a very overwhelming, kind of scary thing for me even to admit to myself, much less imagine that someone else is going to read this. What it is that's really, in terms of my life review, on my heart. But it's, maybe some of you know Joan Borisenko. She's one of our other faculty members. I like to always give credit. She says, you know what? If you just go into the bathroom and close the door and confess to a shower curtain, that boosts your immune system. Sometimes you just need to say something. I know in my own Vidui, the last version of it, which I wrote last January, and I'll be updating it again every year that I get older, it takes on more poignancy. And one of the lines in mine is just very, I'm grateful for life and for so many things I've been able to do to my life. And I also tell my family, I know that by nature of my personality and background, that I have always been a workaholic. And if anybody knows the Enneagram, I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. And therefore, on the scales of life, sometimes, relationships have sometimes suffered because of my involvement in projects, work, and teaching, which I love. But I ask, in some ways, if someone, maybe a grandchild, because they didn't show up at a game or a ballet concert or something, I want them to hear that I want them to know that I've really reflected on that, and I hope that they would forgive me and send me a hug anyway, in spite of it. And somebody had texted a message there about, let's see, interested in Anam Cara. Other people have recommended Celtic Christianity to me, suggested it has similarities to native spiritual beliefs apart from the John O'Donohue book of that name. Are there resources you would recommend to us? Yes. Oh gosh. So, I mean, one of the easiest things you could do is go to Sacred Art of Living website, go to Anam Cara, and we have 10 major authors that have influenced our work that are part of our Anam Cara training. One I would just mention who's really become very popular recently is John Philip Newell. And again, talk about someone who is very inner spiritual in his approach to things, not particularly denominational. And he's the one who would constantly be pointing out, he's from Scotland, the parallels between Celtic spirituality, which is very earth-based, and native spiritualities, which are also, Celtic spirituality is really an Aboriginal spiritual tradition. Like the only one in Europe that really survived the dualism of Greco-Roman thought. The Celts on the edges of Europe managed to survive and to keep something alive that was very earth-based. You can see the other characteristics of it there on our website. It was the only spirituality in the 5th century that insisted on the absolute equality of men and women when it came to doing spiritual work. So your Anam Cara, your soul friend, was kind of like your priest, like your confessor. And men and women had equal value, equal weight. There was no such thing as gender differentiation, which of course on the mainland of Europe, Christianity spent centuries dealing with that filter. So I just, my commitment to it is because I find it a spiritual language that anybody can relate to. It's a very wide umbrella, and you can be pagan, non-believer, atheist, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, and you'll find, I think, some aspect of that Celtic spiritual tradition that might be support to you. April, I see you have your hand up there. A few of you do. Let's see if we get to some of you now. April is frozen in time there. I don't think she's, Liz is there though. You've got your hand up.
Richard, greetings from Dublin, from the land of Anam Cara.
Oh, indeed, indeed. Which part from Dublin itself? All right.
I live in Dublin, but I'm from the sunny southeast.
All right.
So two things I just loved your presentation, every minute of it, and the reflections, the meditations. I suppose one of the things, and partly in response to the question about resources, is the role that women have played in Ireland and in the Celtic countries in terms of laying out the dead, but also the tradition that has been in Ireland of women able to listen for the sound of death with our mythological sense of the women keening, or in Gaelic, as we say, equina, whereby not only did we have the banshee, the woman of wisdom, announcing that the birth was coming, but then the women who wept and who mourned. And the connection, which I know you have there between Ars Moriendi, but Ars Viviendi leading into Ars Moriendi, of how life and death weren't separate movements or aren't separate movements, but are all one. So sorry, I didn't mean to go on about that. This is my deep appreciation and learning. I'm actually a member of a religious congregation. I'm a sister. And as you know, many of our congregations are in decline, very serious decline. So what I've been trying to do and researching it is to link your findings and that of others with the stages of decline of organizations such as my own. Now, I'm not there yet, but if you have anything to offer into that, and I'd be delighted to get your resources, I will contact you. And so to see that the stages of death and dying are inherent in our various governments, congregations, and so on. So it was just such a gift to listen to you.
Thank you, Liz. Are you a charity sister, or what is your?
No, I'm a Sister of Mercy.
Mercy. Okay, good. I figured it was one of the two. Yeah, we've done down in Cork. I think the mother house of the. Maybe that's not the Mercies. That's the Sisters of Charity.
Okay.
Anyway, we did all of our programs for 12 years in Dublin at Our Lady's Hospice, and
I live beside it.
there you go. So we used to always give tours of your lovely mother house there. But just to briefly respond, yes, absolutely. One of the favorite retreats that I do is with mainline churches in Canada and the United States who know that they're dying. So we're invited to come and help do hospice for congregations. How to, instead of hang on when you should let go, just like in the dying process for a person, how do you name that? And what would be some proactive ways in which we could celebrate what has been done? And certainly with religious women's communities, there would be an amazing parallel. Liz, if you send a note to me afterwards, I would be happy to also send you some, because I'm in Ireland twice a year. And
great.
one of the groups there in Ireland you might want to know, but everybody too, the John Moriarty Institute is brilliant. And John Moriarty, thanks to Mary McGillicuddy, who has brought his work to us, is another, I think, prophetic person. I think I just wanted to leave you with a resource, John Moriarty's, the book called Not the Whole Story, the teaching of John Moriarty. And it was a Cork woman, Mary McGillicuddy, who published it last year. And honestly, Moriarty is speaking as a prophet to our ecological crisis and to the need for us in the West to exactly do what you're saying, to know when that's over, to say enough is enough. And we don't, we hang on long beyond when we should. It causes a lot of pain and suffering. And I love your parallels. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good. Ed, there you had your hand up for some time.
Hi there, Richard. Thank you so much for your presence and that presentation. It just went by so quickly last time. And, this whole thread of conversation is fascinating. And I almost lowered my hand because I wanted to address something that you talked about last time. And of course, it's related to this, but it's not, it might be a little off the thread. And it has to do with forgiveness. And I work with a lot of men in recovery, and we do have a forgiveness ritual. And I run across men who are unwilling to forgive someone, and that's okay. That's something we can address. The tough ones are the men who, and they're coming from a lot of trauma and violence, the men that say, I really don't need to forgive myself or anybody else. I'm all set. Now, in your experience, I don't know if you've run across any situations like that. If you give me any guidance of how to help move these men to a place where they might be a little bit more open.
Oh my. Thank you, Ed. Gosh, as usual here, men are in minority in these kinds of studies, this kind of work. Yeah. Well, of course, isn't this the foundation stone of 12-step spirituality, which is so brilliant, and without which, if the forgiveness piece was taken out, it would all be a house of cards. I'm old enough to have been an Air Force chaplain during the Vietnam days, and so the guys coming into hospice now, exactly, are people who have been carrying that kind of trauma with them, often never even had the ability to talk to spouses or children about their issues of regret and self-forgiveness, and it just gets buried. And there's been a lot of work done on this. I would just recommend one author in particular, Ed, to you. His name is Tom Golden, and you can look up his name on the website. He's in the Washington, D.C. area. He's a psychotherapist, and he's one of our faculty members, again, for Anamkara. I keep mentioning that because that's also a place where you guys could go and see all kinds of resources. But Tom wrote one of the only books that I know of in the American recent literature on men's grief, and it's called Swallowed by a Snake. And it's a brilliant, simple little book that really gets at this. It gets at what this denial is about. And it also, Tom, also, if you go on our website, Sacred Art of Living, there's a subset of 100 teachings called the Soul and Science of Caregiving. And Tom does about 10 of those teachings just on men in grief. And he talks about insights into what causes that denial. And, you know, the first reaction to it is, well, we could have our judgments. It's arrogance, it's denial, and it can be all of that, of course. But really, as you can imagine, when you start peeling back the layers, there's aspects underneath it that are much, much deeper, that are part of a social illness. And I promised I wasn't going to do this, but I can't help it. Yesterday, I just saw one of our two main political candidates was talking about religion, his religion yesterday. I guess I've already given it away, and said, yeah, I consider myself Christian, but I never pray to God for forgiveness. That's not something that I do. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, that alone would be disqualifying, I think, to be a leader. If you really, really believe that you don't need, whether you call it God language or within your religious tradition, it's the height of egotism. And we have a lot of that. And men, it's interesting, often in a strange way, admire that kind of hubris, because it gives them, well, see, if I'm really going to be a man, then I don't have to do that. And I think Tom Golden peels that back, and his 5-part series on the soul and science, I'm just giving you another reference, is those 5-minute videos can be shared. That's what I'm saying. So sometimes in a men's group, you could play a 5-minute video, and you know what? Here's been my experience with it. These tough guys are in tears because it's touching something inside they know is true, but no guy has helped them access that in a safe kind of way. So anyway, I hope that helps a bit, Ed.
That's very helpful, Richard. Thank you very much.
Okay. Someone else. I got several pages here, so I'm flipping back and forth to make April there. Now you're, I think you're unfrozen in time. So.
Hi.
Hi.
Of course, right as you called on me, everything shut down. I'm sorry about that.
Right.
Glad to be back. I wanted to ask you specifically about a quote that you, I think you even had it on your slideshow in your presentation. So I don't want to take us away from anything. So just let me know if we should hold this until later. But I think it was Michael Carney, the doctor, the MD, who said if a dying person even begins to attend to the soul responds 1,000-fold. And I was hoping maybe you could say more about that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So Michael Carney, another good Irishman from Cork, again, in this case. Michael is the medical director of our Anam Cara program, okay? And he's really one of the early pioneers of the Irish hospice movement. He was very influenced by Dame Cecily Saunders. And he is one of the only people I know who managed to write medical journal articles about this subject without scrubbing out the spiritual and emotional dimensions of it. Because as you know, if you write an article for JAMA or something, you can't quote something unless you can put it under a microscope and prove it. So Michael had his 3 theses that he's written consistently. One is the Western medical model has no way of helping people deal with their suffering. Most suffering is not fixable. You have to lean into it. You can't skirt around it. And then the third is the quote that you're mentioning. And actually, if I understand it correctly, the medical journal editors wanted him to take that out because they said, well, yeah, how can you prove that? Soul, the word doesn't even appear in the medical literature. If you Google soul in Medline, it doesn't compute, or it refers to people who are broken somehow or historically wounded. And what it was is it's a quote from Hippocrates, which I think is brilliant. In other words, you can't scrub out the great-great-grandparent of Western medicine. And of course, the quote in the Greek is, the word for soul is the word for psyche, but it's the same term. That this would be, I think, very much validated with depth psychology, that when we talk about our shadow work, when we turn toward it instead of trying to avoid it, instead of pushing it deeper into unconscious, it begins to become a great teacher potentially. It becomes the light. So that's the reason for that third quote, and that's why it appears there with Michael Carney's name. And you can Google the JAMA article. By the way, I also, while I'm thinking about it, a number of you have followed up and said you would like for me to send you some resources that I mentioned throughout the talk. And I've just been waiting for this hour to be finished, and then we'll gather them all, and then we'll send you a little bucket list of some video references and various things. And April, I'll try to remember to include the JAMA article by Michael Carney, so you can see it in the original there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good. Someone else there?
Richard,
Yes.
what has been most meaningful to you in this inner work of age that you've been teaching and generating for so long now? In terms of your own practices and your own direct experience, what has been most meaningful for you?
Thank you. What a great question. You know, it's funny to be 75 and suddenly, you know, how did I get here? And here I am. And I think since my wife's death, I always talk about Mary a bit because that was a pivotal moment in my life. Her living with her mortality and cancer for 10 years and then losing her finally, she became a great teacher to me. One of my sacred or courageous questions when Mary died, I was around age 60, was how alone. So we do a retreat once a year where people have 4 days to go into contemplative practice and to generate one sacred question. It's amazing how hard that is for people. The soul is always speaking in questions, not in answers. And that was my question at Mary's death: how alone? How is this next chapter going to even be possible? And in my aging process, and I can really honestly say because of that vidui, as Ray pronounced it, I think the piece that I came to was an awareness that the question from my ego or my conscious self, my emotional self, was how alone, the fear and all that was related to that. But really the question underneath that it took me to was how together. It's a huge shift. There's a quantum shift in that. And what it's set me out doing in the last certainly decade of my life is noticing what that means to me. I don't have apparitions. I don't do seances. I don't hear voices. But I have had profound encounters with Mary on a regular daily basis. I feel a sense of guidance and presence, not only for myself, but for our family, her kids and grandkids, whom she cares about very, very much. And so I get to be a channel of that love to them. And my annual spiritual living will practice holds my feet to the fire. I know that once a year, I'm going to have to think, uh-oh, you know what? I've peeled back another layer. I've gotten a little more honest. I'm a little less afraid of exposing my vulnerable self. I want my family to know this. In fact, well, just last weekend, I have a grandson who's 35 and he's dealing with a big crisis in his family. And he came to me, we spent about an hour just doing a long walk. And when it was over, he said, Grandpa, this is what you've always been to me. I said, what? Someone, not with the answers, but somebody who listens. And I said, oh, come on, Jim, you have other people listen. Your wife listens. He says, no. He says, I need a guy in my life who listens to me. And my dad is dead. I don't have a brother. You've always been that for me. So that was just one little example of where, not in hiding my full self, but being vulnerable with that, I'm finding creates a much more authentic relationship. It's beyond just giving a card on Grandparents' Day. I really savor the deepening conversations that I have regularly with brothers now, which used to be very much on the surface. And we still talk about baseball and football and so forth, but really very shortly afterwards, almost always in every conversation, it also goes someplace deep. And I know that's because, as the oldest of four brothers, if I can model not needing to cover up and polish who I am, if I can be who I am to others, that to me is one of the great aging practices. So thanks for the question, Connie. One of our mentors in the early years of our work was Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And the last work that he was in his 90s when he died, I think he was close around 90. And he said, he started a whole project. He said it was called, there's the work that you do spiritually in your 60s, 70s, 80s. And he said, what's the work if you make it to your 90s? And he said, for me, it's entirely about one thing: forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. I cannot ask forgiveness enough. And he says, when I look back at my life, he said, and it's not because I was mean-spirited, but I hurt a lot of people. And that's my work now, is to constantly be reaching out. And I thought, wow, what a mentor. I'm looking for mentors like that in my life. So.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I think Reb Zalman said something about when we don't forgive someone, we're in jail together.
Yeah.
We're stuck together. We're imprisoned until we release them and we release ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that kind of wisdom shows up really in all great spiritual traditions. It's like when the ego finally begins to do its work, as you know, Connie, you were telling me about the earlier books that you've written and work you've done around shadow. You know, it really is about shadow boxing. My mentor, Richard Rohr, always says, that's about all there is in the second half of life. It sounds kind of depressing, but it's like, there's nothing else to prove. You know, what other kind of kudos do we want? What matters? What people remember most is that from the heart, sincere, authentic. And that is really, really hard. And, you know, I don't care whether I'm talking to counselors or clergy, we all have these defended ego selves. It's very, very interesting. And our world is very hurting because of that. If we could have just one person, of course, the people who really stand up and ask for that kind of forgiveness are usually martyrs because their clan doesn't appreciate them. You know, we expect people to defend our personal interests, but I think, you know, we're at the end of that. One of the videos that I'll share a link to with you guys as well is Joanna Macy, who's one of our wonderful teachers. And there's a 5-minute video where she talks about doing aging work in the environment. And I'll just let it speak for itself, but she's a great Buddhist teacher. She has spent her life on the front lines of Chernobyl and wherever there's a disaster. This woman has spent her life going there and being with people who are suffering. And she says, this may be it. We maybe have run out of time. This may be the great unraveling. It could be the great turning. Now that sounds very threatening and awful and awesome. But then if you listen to that 6-minute video, she talks about what it is that I can do. And she quotes Thich Nhat Hanh as a master of how to be with even the crisis of the planet that is beyond my control. what little can I do? I'll just give you one little thing. Thich Nhat Hanh says, don't go climbing over barricades. Don't be strategic. Go out to the forest and weep. Listen to nature and weep. That's the single best thing that any of us can do. And I think that's kind of a global aging forgiveness practice, isn't it? That maybe as we have less time to be busy at our desks and computers, we can sit in nature and really, really resonate with what the mother is saying.
And
Sure.
that reminds me of the class we all had with Martha Crawford on the intersection of our personal grief and our collective grief. Yeah. And also, I would like to suggest, if people want to follow up, Reb Zalman left a community behind him called saging.org. And there are ongoing workshops and community events that you can check out. I did their 1-year training to become an elder.
It's brilliant. And honestly, I want to give credit to Rabbis Nadia and Victor Gross, who really continue to support this in their aging years. I think they're both close to 80, and they just do amazing interfaith work. I'm always happy to have them as part of our faculty. Trish, you had your hand up there. I wanted to make sure we got to you.
Hi, thank you, Richard. I really enjoyed your presentation. And I just got finished teaching a yoga class, and I was so moved by the way it is poem about the thread. I read it as a meditation before the class, and if you don't mind, I'll just read it very quickly so that people can be aware, but I wanted to invite you to say some words about it and about the thread. If you would, I'd love to hear your take on it. So it goes, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding, but you don't ever let go of the thread.
It's a great poem. It's William Safford, is one of our Oregon poet laureates that wrote that. It's been used and quoted all over the world because I think somehow the metaphor just is apt and also challenging, because I've done a weekend retreat with that poem, nothing else. And just we create exercises around how I might be able to get to the thread. And I always tell people what you have to take off the table are the standard canned kinds of responses. People are typically at first going to put down, well, it's my family, it's my faith. No, I said, I don't want any kind of response to that except one that is absolutely unique to your spiritual DNA. You're 1 in a billion, you're 1 in 10 billion. What spark of the divine are you? What is your unique reason? How are you the divine face here on this planet? And when you really challenge people to do that, well, it's interesting with what they come up with. And so, because I've worked with it for so many years, I've whittled it down to one word. My marching orders, my DOS, my driver's operator system, my spiritual DNA, somehow in me from early on was to inspire. And I don't mean that as I'm some inspirational guru. I mean inspire in the sense of to breathe with people at the deepest soulful level. And to do that regardless of what belief system a person has. And I've been doing that really for most of my conscious life. And so I hope that if I do that when I'm teaching, that I also do that equally with my family and my grandchildren. Not by being sort of behind a desk at teaching, being a pedagogue, but being someone who lives authentically from who I am, not lying, telling the truth in every situation. That's hard to do, but inspiring people then to be honest back is the greatest joy that I have in life. So anyway, thank you for mentioning that poem. It's certainly the favorite of a lot of people, and it's a good one. You could almost take that one and put it together with your annual Living Spiritual Will exercise. You could start with that and try to name your thread. And it might be surprising for people to see what that is.
Richard, that's just what I do. When I teach life review, I use that poem. Because when you do your life review, you see the thread. You know, we call it the Dharma. It becomes visible with life review.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, so yeah, wonderful things. Of course, poets often get at things much better. You know, I know that our Anamkara work could not be taught without poetry. Aboriginal traditions, native traditions are never taught with dogmas. It's taught with metaphor. You know, the soul doesn't speak in terms of, you know, declarative sentences. The soul speaks in terms of poetry and music and ritual and art and metaphor and questions. So I have a little thread of connection still to my Roman Catholic tradition. I teach at a local seminary here in Oregon, and my opening day with the students who are going to be studying the scripture for the first time is to have them bring a Bible, a New Testament, with a yellow highlighter, and to highlight how many times in the 4 Gospels Jesus asks a question. I'll spare you. It's 170 times if they get it right. Then the second week is to take a different color highlighter and say, and how many times does the teacher give an answer? 3 times out of 170. 167 times he punts. What do you think? Don't ask me. What do you think? But you're supposed to be the teacher. See, all great spiritual wisdom does that. It leads you into your own inner wisdom. And that may be the Quaker insight that was something I think Christianity could do for a big infusion of. Trusting the inner light more, the inner teacher, instead of outside external authority. I think it would solve a lot of the problems of spiritual and religious abuse that I seem to encounter with people at my age in life. Time for maybe another comment or two, and then I've got some things to kind of close with here.
Barbara has her hand up.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for sharing so candidly your experience with your grief and your lostness when your wife passed. I didn't expect to be asking this question, but I have a good friend who lost their life partner about 4 days ago. I'm trying to figure out how to support him. And usually there's an article that I normally rely on in these cases that's really about how you can use personal ritual to try and heal or manage grief. But I wondered kind of what's on your short list when people ask you for recommendations for helping people who are in deep grief.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, first of all, you know, if it's really that kind of loss, I mean, we're talking about the loss of a life partner. You know, there's no, I found anyway, the first year I had all these friends because of the work I do who were sending me books and articles. And to be honest, I was numb. It was like an atomic bomb had gone off in my life, and I really couldn't think or feel anything. 2 things did helped me. One was actually down in Santa Barbara, California. Michael Carney, my good friend, would, I'd go down there and visit him. We would take long walks on the beach. And I remember him saying something about nature is sympathetic. It's almost like you got to get out of your inside environment and just get out. There's something about nature being a bigger healer than any advice could be. The second actually was a book that somebody gave me, and it took me more than a year to open it, but it was the title of the book that grabbed me, and I found a lot of consolation. It was Thich Nhat Hanh's book, No Death, No Fear. And the title just stopped me in my tracks. it's like a koan, isn't it? No death. Do I believe there's death? What do I believe death is? What's the fear I have around death? That it's the end? Is there nothing beyond death? You know, it just got me at some soul level wrestling a bit with really what I believe, you know, and what do I, more than believe, what do I experience? So I don't know, that's, you know, certainly just accompanying people and letting them tell their sorrowful stories and cry over and over and over again, and not trying too quickly to fix it and to save it. And dang it all, I just want you to be okay because you're my friend and I care about you. That is just the people that helped the least were good intentioned people would say, you know, you're young enough. There's plenty of women out there. But it's just, you know, it's like telling a woman at a miscarriage, you can get pregnant again. You know, that's just not helpful. You know, at least for me, it wasn't helpful in the wake of that kind of loss. So, okay. Good. Well, I see we're at just a couple of minutes, so I just wanted to put one little thing up here, just as a reminder that I will be very happy to send anybody any of the things that I've mentioned here. If you send an email to info@sacredartofliving.org, some of you already have, and we'll be following up here in the next week or so and sending you all kinds of links to different kinds of things that you might appreciate. So I wanted to mention that again. I also wanted to mention, if you go to our homepage of our Sacred Art of Living website, on the homepage, there's an hour-long video that was broadcast on American public broadcast channels all over the country. That's a historical DVD on the history of the Art of Dying program that I referenced to you guys. So that's all there. And then finally, just some of the things that we do that if you're interested, just go to our website and sign up to be on our contact mailing list. The Art of Living and Dying workshop series, the Deep End, Becoming Anamkara, the videos I've told you about, Tom Golden and others. It's a whole library there called the Soul and Science. And then we have weekly podcasts. Every Friday, we release a podcast. And it's with one of our wonderful teachers around the world. And all, you know, with the podcast, all you got to do is sign up to any free podcast channel and then just put in our channel called Soul Size Questions. And whether it's YouTube, whatever it is, Amazon, every Friday, you'll get a 20-minute video. And I think if you liked this conversation, that's what we're doing. We're having ongoing conversations with our larger community. So, Connie, I guess I wanted to be respectful of time. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Deep gratitude to you. This was rich and wide-ranging and open-hearted, and I'm so grateful. I'm going to see everyone again in 2 weeks, Tuesday, October 22nd. I just posted what I need from you to prepare for the ritual. I'm going to ask Pacifica if they'll send an email out with this, but I don't know if they will. So you might want to copy this post. I'm going to give you a minute to do that just so that you have it. And we'll have time for a closing conversation also in 2 weeks. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And thank you, Richard, for your wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Blessings to everybody. Bye-bye now.